Shalom Aleichem. Welcome back to our fourth class in this series, which is biblical personalities and leadership styles, as well as lessons that we can learn. For those of you who had submitted last week, I absolutely loved the content. It was super relevant to Purim, and it definitely gave me outlook and perspective. Our Chachamim tell us, and I don't actually know where, because I tried to find it in the Gemara, and it's not the exact words. The Rambam quotes it somewhat, but just like our faces are different, right? Kach da'atem shonot ze mizeh. We think different, we act different, and it's something that really should be celebrated. Nobody likes to look the same. In fact, anytime somebody says to you, like, "Oh my gosh, you remind me so much of," the immediate knee-jerk response we have is, "No, I don't. I don't want to look like anybody. Even if they're beautiful, I don't want to look like them." And I think there's something incredible that we have here in our Bet Midrash, which is not just the ability to appreciate that we externally look differently, but to genuinely not just accept, but also appreciate the fact that we really think differently. It says that en Bet Midrash bli chidush. There is no real learning center if nothing new comes out of it. If it's just a bunch of regurgitated Torah, sometimes I think that there are thousands of rabbis, but really, there are maybe only 5, because really out of the 1,000, they all pledge allegiance to one camp, another camp, a third camp. So it's a lot of good spokesmen, but it's not a lot of differences. And I appreciate it. I appreciate the fact that you have created with me a place and a space where we're able to really share our own perspective. So thank you for that. Today I was a little torn because I was not sure who I wanted to choose. On the one hand, there are a lot of good candidates. I love the Nevi'im Achronim. I think that they're of the least studied books. Okay, so I'm talking about the latter half. For sure, the Trei Asar, aside from maybe the book of Yonah, which many people know because we read it by the high holidays. But then there's also the Rishonim, Achronim. I've come to the conclusion that probably we need to learn for the next 120 years at least together, so we can comprehensively go through the Tanakh. Like I told you initially, I think my feeling is that if you never... Now, I was having lunch at home, and some company sent me a catalog with all their latest Jewish books that had come out. So a bunch of new Pesach cookbooks and kids' stories, and Hashem gave us the most incredible book in the world. I don't know why we keep mass producing nonsense when if really the Jewish community just focused on knowing the Tanakh by heart, we have a lifetime to conquer between the Tanakh, Gemara, Mishnah, throw in there Mishnah Torah. You have enough books to study for the rest of your life without ever having to bump into contemporary books. And not that contemporary books can't enhance what you have. Simply, you can't build on something that lacks a foundation. And I was sharing this at the wee hours of the morning. The husband and I were up working yesterday, and I said, I think that the Jewish community is actually afraid of learning Tanakh. Because if they learn Tanakh, it would destroy the myth of Orthodox Judaism. We don't go to the army, we don't have a country, women are... Fill in whatever myth you know in 2024. It's obvious as soon as I was reading yesterday about Yirmiyahu Hanavi talking to the people, and then David HaMelech going out to war, and who knew this? But Achitophel commits suicide. I'm thinking, wow, I've learned this, and I never even learned this. And I think that a lot of it's tagged onto the Maskilim, they learn too much Tanakh, so we don't learn. It's a very, in my opinion, juvenile and reactionary way to deal with issues. But my feeling is that if we were to learn Tanakh honestly, the community, the Jewish community, and those who are seemingly self-appointed representatives would not be able to match up much of what is done in the name of God and Judaism and what actually happens in our history. And I think that's part of our re-education. We don't have to fight every war in battles, but through education, we have the ability to say, hold on, that's not accurate. That's not true. It sounds like a really nice idea, but it's not anywhere in our books. It may be a nice, innovative idea that you've come up with, and maybe it be something we want to adopt. But to tell me that it's something biblical, that it's something Tanachi, that it's something that's from our tradition, only somebody who doesn't know our books can make that up. I was watching recently, I think he was a comedian actually, and he was talking about, he said he's from the crazy Christians who, he said the standard ones, the pastors always tell you, you don't read the books. We're going to read the books and we're going to tell you everything in the book that you need to know. He said, I'm from the crazy ones who actually went ahead and read the book. And then I'm like, what they told me in Sunday school doesn't match up to what I have here. And it was funny and tragic at once because I think a lot of that is accurate today. In fact, I know, so this is not heresy, I know communities where I grew up, thankfully not mine, where the girls were not allowed to learn from actual books. Okay? So what they would do is they would photocopy the Chumash, and we're obviously not talking about Gemara, Mishnah, I'm not talking about those books. I'm talking about standard Tanakh. What the schools would do is they would photocopy the Chumash and then teach from there. Why? You have to ask them. I once got a hold of one of those copies, and there were parts that, like the Catholic Church has done to us for centuries, it was the new abridged edition. There were whole chunks that were missing from there. And I honestly couldn't believe it. Like, I understand if you're going to edit out what I say. Like, you could go and cancel me. You can't cancel God. Like, that just doesn't work. You know, Hashem thought it was okay for us to learn about Yehuda and Tamar. But for whatever reason, you're more religious than God. Hashem thought it was really important to put in all the civil wars and bloody battles and dissent that was happening in the Jewish... But for some reason, you think you're holier. The absurdity, and then not just the absurdity, but then to tell me that you're more religious. You see, I appreciate the person who's honest, who says, God said one thing, I can innovate and do whatever I want. What I can't stand, in Hebrew we have a word for it, it's called anashim tzvuim, hypocrites. You can't tell me you're the true Jew, you're the only Jew, you're the super Jew, when you just cut and paste in your own way too. But you've done a really good job at marketing it as we do it one better. And I can't help to think, but thank God the Torah was not given in 2024, because probably it would have been canceled before it was even given to us. We read on Friday night Shir HaShirim, and every time I read it, the romance, the poetry, the beauty is so compelling. But if Shlomo HaMelech wrote it today, I promise you all the walls in Yerushalayim would have, they call them pashkevilim, right? They have all these papers that they plaster on with all the Lashon Hara that you have to hear. I promise you that's the list Shlomo HaMelech would be on. Why? Not because he was perverted, but because we have perverted our Judaism. We have twisted what's right and wrong, and then marketed it to the people as this is the truth. That was not what I came to talk about today, but I think that was an important thing to share. I want to talk to you about David HaMelech. Now, my disclaimer, David HaMelech has a very, very soft spot in my heart. What do I mean? My mother, Hashem should bless her, and my dad with a very long life. Whenever I talk to her, I always say, Ma, you know, I hope when I grow up, I'm going to be as righteous as you. And then she always laughs and she says, you don't have a chance. You're just like your father. I say, thank you. I think that's a compliment because you married him. But the truth is, my mother is, and I don't say this in jest, is one of the holiest people I know. From when I'm tiny, the way I would wake up is to my mother chanting Tehillim. Any spare time, in fact, almost all the pictures we have of her, whether she's holding the kid, she's sitting at the table, she always has a Tehillim in her hand. Always saying Tehillim. In fact, when I got much older, I once was frustrated and I said to her, I said, Ma, stop talking to God. Why do you talk to him all day? Why don't you talk to me? She said, listen, Devorah, he listens, you don't. I said, okay, point well taken. But the truth is, all my memories of being home is just hearing and seeing my mother chanting Tehillim and this deep love and appreciation of the character, of the personality. More than just, see, unlike other people, my mother doesn't use Tehillim as a segula. She doesn't say 13 chapters so that her 13 children should now become whatever, fill in the blank. My mother doesn't say Tehillim for 40 days. She says Tehillim because she genuinely prays. She speaks, she lives, she breathes the challenges, the joys, the sadness, the happiness of David Melech Israel. And I think, honestly, we do ourselves a disservice when we don't learn Tehillim, but we use it as some kind of magic. It's not another segula. If you're going to say 40 days of Tehillim, yes, and then what? If you learn Tehillim, if you understand the life and the struggle, you then very much understand why David Melech Israel Chai V'Kayam. Why is he an eternal king? What about his life and his struggles on the one hand are so kingly and so divine, and yet so normal and benign and so relatable? And I believe that's really what lives on. I want to talk to you about a little bit of his life. And when we talk about leadership models, if I look at David HaMelech, you can almost split into two categories the way he categorically deals with individuals. One of them I will call internal dissenters versus external enemies. The way he approaches those who are within, those who are part of the family, those who are under his jurisdiction, those he has to care for, is diametrically opposed to how he deals with the outsiders, the enemies of Am Yisrael, those who have not joined but are causing trouble. And you find, and I want to really draw because I think it's so relevant to today, the difference between what do I do to the people who I'm responsible for versus how do I deal with those who are outside and hurting the people that I care and I'm responsible for. And I think those lessons are highly relevant to us as a nation and us as a world. Let's open to Shemuel Aleph. If you can, open up to Shemuel Aleph, Perek Tet Zayin, Pasuk Zayin. A little bit of history. Okay. If you'll recall, in one of our classes, we talked about Shaul HaMelech and how the kingdom was ultimately taken from him because of the misdeeds and the missteps that he took. For those of you who went to the synagogue this past week, we read the haftarah of exactly this, where Shaul HaMelech is being rebuked by Shemuel for doing what he thought was being more religious than God. We spoke about that, if you remember. If you don't, go back to the other shiurim. So here we're on the heels of that, where Hashem tells Shemuel HaNavi, I've given up on Shaul HaMelech. It's now time for us to choose another king. Go to the house of Bet Yishai. Go to the house of Yishai. He has a child. I want you to anoint. Tell me what happens. Shemuel HaNavi comes to Bet Yishai and tell me what unfolds. Yefeh mod. He comes to the house of Bet Yishai and he says to him, Hashem sent me on a mission here to anoint one of the children to be the next king. So let's look before Pasuk Zayin. Let's look a little bit before. Look at Pasuk Vav. Vayhi bevoam, when all the children come, vayaret Eliyav. He sees the oldest Eliyav. Vayomer, ach neged Adonai Meshichov. This must be him. And Hashem rebukes him and says, Vayomer Adonai el Shemuel. Hashem says to Shemuel HaNavi, Al tabit al mareu. Don't look at his external appearance. Vel givoa komato and his height, his appearance, his ki ma'astihu. He's somebody that I've been disgusted with. Ki lo asher yira ha'adam. What you see as a human being, ki ha'adam yira le'inayim. You just see with your eyes. V'Adonai yira le'levav. You know how I judge people? I judge people based on what's in their heart. You, Shemuel HaNavi, you just looked with your eyes and he looks kingly. He looks like somebody could fit the job, whether it's his physical appearance, his charisma, his attitude. Hashem says, that's not how you choose a leader. You see with your eyes. I see into people's hearts. This is not the right leader. So he goes to the next. Vaikra Yishai el Avinadav. He brings Avinadav, the next son. Nope. Hashem didn't choose him either. He brings one after the next. All 7 of his children. If you look at Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vayomer Shmuel el Yishai, Hatamu Anarim, are we done? Are we finished? Is there anybody else left? Because so far, nobody from who you brought is who HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose. And Yishai thinks, he says, oh yeah, you're right, you know. Vayomer Od Shaar HaKatan, there's another young one over there. And you should know, young in general doesn't always mean young in age as much as insignificant. Oh, he's out there, he's the shepherd, he's the reject over there. Vayomer Shmuel el Yishai, Shilacha, go call for him. V'kachenu, ki lo nasov ad bo po. We're not going to break bread. We're not going to sit down to eat until I anoint the right person. Go bring him. Vayishlach, so he sends for him. Vayiviehu, they bring him. V'hu admoni, and he's a redhead in yifei einayim with beautiful eyes. V'tov roi, vayomer Adonai kum mishacheu ki zehu. This is it. The one that they didn't even think to bring. You see, when he came to the house of Yishai, he says to Yishai, Hashem chose one of your sons. Who does Yishai bring? He brings who he thinks is the most viable candidate. He brings Eliav, Aminadav. Why does he not bring David? Why do you think he doesn't bring David? There's a story about David. There is a midrash that tells us that maybe there was suspicion that David, they weren't sure if he was a legitimate child, if he was born from a maidservant. That's a midrash. It doesn't say it in the actual text, but seemingly Yishai didn't even think he was a viable candidate. He's the young one. He's the one who's out in the field. He's the kid who nobody thinks is going to become anything of him. Why would I even waste your time? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Shmuel, you're mistaken. You're looking externally at what characteristics you want for a leader. You don't know what's going on in people's hearts. You don't know what's going on inside. And ultimately, he crowns David. It's why later on, if you go to, for a minute, jump with me to Tehillim, Chav Zayin, the 27th chapter. We normally... Yeah. Oh, Yafeh Mod. Hold on, Rachel, you don't have to go to Shaul. I had a different question. If you look at the Pasuk, in Pasuk Yud Bet, it says, Vayishlach, they sent for him, Vayavieu, they bring him. And immediately, what does it describe? His external characteristics. It tells me, V'hu admoni im yifei einayim. Yes, he was a redhead and he had beautiful eyes. I have a svara, I have a thought, which is, there's a very interesting Gemara. Okay, the Gemara says that when somebody's looking for a wife, it says, Kala or betula, she'ena yafot en kol gufa tzricha bdika. If you find a woman who has beautiful eyes, you don't have to check the rest of her body. And the Chachamim over there say, well, what in the world are we talking about? And our Chachamim tell us something very interesting. That our eyes, it doesn't mean do you have blue eyes or green eyes or hazel-colored eyes? Are they almond-shaped or are they long-lashed? Obviously, that's not what it means. You ever talk to somebody who's wearing sunglasses? One of the most annoying things is to talk to somebody whose eyes you can't see. Why? Because in the end of the day, we know in English, we say eyes are the windows to somebody's soul. Yes? When you look into somebody's eyes, you're able to penetrate that much more than anything else. It's why you'll find little kids sometimes. As soon as they know they did something wrong, what do? They go like this, right? It's a knee-jerk response. Because when you look somebody in the eyes, you're looking way beyond the color and you're looking into their souls. Chachamim tell us when you find somebody who you can look into their eyes and you can see the beauty, nothing else needs to be checked out. If you find somebody whose eyes broadcast goodness, kindness, good character traits, you don't have to keep digging. You already know this is a good person. And if you look at the person, you see, this is not somebody good. When I look at them, I get, today we say, I get bad vibes. There's a reason you feel that way. You can sometimes see a lot of goodness and sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of darkness in people's eyes. In fact, There's a different Gemara that talks about which organs are considered internal organs versus external. Why the conversation? It has to do with Hilchot Shabbat and which organs you would be allowed to save versus which ones you would not for medical treatment. And over there, it's very interesting because the conversation also revolves around, are eyes considered internal or external organs? And whereas this is not the majority opinion, one of the Chachamim say it's both. Because though it's something external, so it's not your heart that's inside or your lungs or your brains, it's something that literally connects your external directly in. Now, again, that's not a halachic opinion, yes? But Rachel, it's a good question. That's the bottom line. If you look at Tehillim Chav Zayin, the 27th chapter, Svaradim, we actually say this all year. I know in Ashkenaz communities, they start saying it on Rosh Chodesh Elul all the way till Simchat Torah. It's which Tehillim? LeDavid Adonai Ori V'Yishi. Yes? If you look at Perek Chav Zayin, look at Pasuk Yod. So it talks about Hashem being his light and his strength. And if he has a Kadosh Baruch Hu, he's not afraid of anybody. But if you look at Pasuk Yod, he says, Ki avi v'imi azavuni, va'adonai yasfeni. David HaMelech says, because my parents, Ki avi v'imi azavuni, my parents have forsaken me, va'adonai yasfeni, but you, Hashem, you've gathered me and you brought me under your protection. You've cared for me. And I think this is something so critical. So often we see leaders who their potential wasn't recognized by the people who were closest to them. David HaMelech, Avraham Avinu. You have certain figures where they were so great and they go down in the books of history as the greatest of leaders, and yet, unfortunately, their family is on the wrong side of the history. Their family is on the side of the persecutors, of those who call them crazy, who think they're weird, who think they're different. And I think there's a certain amount of nichama for all of us, which is there will always be people who tread on you. There are always going to be people who don't believe in your dreams. And sometimes those people, see, if my neighbor doesn't like me, I don't care. So they don't like me. But if my mother doesn't want me, if my father doesn't want me, if the people I love and respect don't value me, that hurts so much more. And you find over here, David HaMelech is being very honest. My parents abandoned me. My parents said, Shemuel HaNavi, you came for one of my children, it's for sure not David. He's for sure not the character that you want. And yet, ultimately, we don't even know the rest of the brothers' names. Nobody cares. They're not part of the making of the Jewish people's history. Something important for us. I want to show you another place. So that's the setting of parental involvement and brothers. I want to take you to another scene where we have an interaction between David HaMelech and his oldest brother, again, Eliav. Look at Shmuel Aleph, Pasuk Yud Zayin. Perek Yud Zayin, Pasuk Chav Chet. Okay. Background. So this is already much later on. Shaul HaMelech is still the king. Our main enemies, and I'm going to send you a copy of this in our WhatsApp group. Our main enemies we're dealing with here are the Plishtim. Please tell me, where do the Plishtim reside? For those of you familiar with the map. For those of you familiar, the Plishtim have never died. They just keep changing their names. Okay? Yes. So the Plishtim, the name Plishtim, Philistines, predates Palestinian by a couple of thousand years. Yes? Okay? The Plishtim lived in Gaza and forever have made trouble for the Jewish people. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Depending on our leadership, we were sometimes able to keep them at bay and push them back. Anytime you find the Plishtim, you will always find problems. It's interesting that there are certain people and there are certain places that seem to be a magnet for controversy, chaos, war. Gaza seems to be one of those places. The Jewish people have always had problems, really from time immemorial. From when we've entered the land of Israel, the Plishtim who live all across Gaza, and I will send you one of the maps just so you can visualize it. So you have here the head of the Plishtim, Goliath. Remember the story with Goliath? Yeah, tell me what happened with Goliath, the head of the Plishtim. What is he trying to do? What is he saying to the Jewish people?
He's offering to settle my army versus army. Like, choose one of you, and he'll fight one of them, and nobody wants to go. David is sent by his family to give food to the brothers.
Oh, and what is he? Very good. What is he over here?
I think Goliath was cursing Hashem, and he offers to fight.
Very good. I'm going to recommend, because I'm not going to read this story to you. I want you to read the story to yourself. But that is the story in a nutshell, which is Goliath comes and he's standing in the valley, cursing at HaKadosh Baruch Hu, cursing at the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are terrified of him. Meanwhile, Yishai had sent David HaMelech not to fight the war, simply to bring his older brothers food, weaponry. He comes and he overhears what's going on, and he turns to his colleagues and he says, I don't understand. How long are you going to let this guy just stand there and shame the Jewish people? And Maka Kadosh Baruch Hu. What happens? If you look at Pasuk Chavchet, so again, Shmuel Aleph Perek Yod Zayin, Pasuk Chavchet. Vayishma Eliav, so the oldest brother, Vayishma Eliav Achiv Agadol, here's David talking to the people. B'dabo el anashim vayichar af Eliav b'David, and he gets angry at David. Vayomer, and he says to him, Lama ze yaradeta? Why did you come down here? Now, unbeknownst to him, he came there because Yishai had sent him. Again, something similar to Yosef HaTzadik, brothers. Lama ze yaradeta? Why did you come down? Ve'el mi natashta ma'at hatzona hena bamidbar. He's telling him, who did you come? Why did you leave the sheep? Why are you here? And what are you mixing in? Ani adati et zdoncha. I know all your bad things you do and the evilness in your heart. You're a rabble rouser. You're here just to make trouble. You're here because you want to mix in. You're young, you're fresh-blooded, you're hot-tempered. You're here to make trouble. Who sent you? What is David HaMelech's response? Vayomer David, and David says, Ma asiti? Ma asiti ata? What did I do this time to you? Meaning, you always get angry at me for something. What did I do this time to make you so angry? Hello, Davaru? Did I do anything to you? Now here he's shaming him in front of everybody. Eliav is reaming him. And David's response is, what do you want from my life? What do you want this time? Why are you getting angry? He's not getting into a confrontation. He's not fighting with him. He's also not letting him trample him. And ultimately, the story continues where David HaMelech takes on the challenge, despite everybody's pushback of, you're too young, you're not seasoned in war. What does David HaMelech say? If you go down a little bit, let's skip that part. He ends up winning. He ends up winning the war. And what happens is, if you look at Pasuk, just go a little bit further to Pasuk. Let's go to... No, let's leave Chavchet a minute. He wins the war, right? He wins the war, and he comes back, and now he's a celebrity. So he goes from not even being a somebody, being mocked, being yelled at by his siblings, to ultimately, he comes back, and the people are cheering him on. The crowds are throwing jewelry at him. What does this do to Shaul HaMelech? So let's look for a minute, if you can. Go to Shmuel Aleph, Perek Tet Zayin, Pasuk Chaf. Shaul HaMelech, another conversation for another time, is going through some serious bouts of what would seemingly either be depression or some kind of tremendous sadness. and he wants somebody to come play music to change his mood. Now, it's very interesting. I have one of my professors who her research is on epigenetics, and epigenetics and how trauma affects even the basic, really DNA of a person. One of the ways we now know that we can reverse the damage. So we're not talking about genetics that can't be changed, but certain genetics that can, really is through the use of music. Yes, we know that music somehow is able to get into people's hearts and souls. And for another day, another conversation, I hope one day to do research on why you find, specifically in the religious community, something very interesting, which is almost every time there's tragedy, it always comes along with a kumsitz. Now, part of it, in my opinion, for those who are not familiar, kumsitz is everyone bringing guitars, let's sing. A part of it is I think there's a fear of conversation. But I think there's another part which is much deeper, that music in many ways really touches areas that even the greatest intellect and conversation cannot. So what happens? If you look at Pasuk Chaf, Vayikach Yishai Chamor Lechem B'no Ad Yayin Ugdi Yizim Echad V'Yishlach B'Yad David B'no Al Shaul. He sends David to Shaul HaMelech. Why? Look at Pasuk Chaf Aleph. Vayavo David El Shaul V'Yamod Lefanav. He goes and he stands in front of him. Vayehavehu Ma'od. Vayi lo Noseh Kelim. And he falls in love with David. And it continues over there, where he really makes him one of the members of his family. Now, when it tells you Vayehavehu, it's not a lie. Shaul HaMelech loved David. It's after he kills Goliath, and the people in the street start screaming. Look at Pasuk, Perik Yudchet, Pasuk Tet. After they come back from battle, with the Plishtim, and they successfully win. Look at Pasuk Tet Zayin. Perek Yudchet, Pasuk Zayin. V'ta'anena hanashim hamesachkot. So the ladies came out, they were cheering. V'tomarna, and what were they chanting? Hikash Shaul balafav. Shaul killed thousands. V'David b'rivovotav. But David HaMelech, he killed in the tens of thousands. Vayichar l'Shaul me'od. And this angered Shaul HaMelech a lot. Vayireh be'einav hadavar hazeh. And this made him really angry. Vayomer, natnu leDavid revavot, v'li natnu alafim. Why are they praising David HaMelech more than me? V'od lo ach hamelucha. Next, what's going to happen? He doesn't even have the kingdom, and already they're busy praising him, they're celebrating him. Pasuk Tet. Vayi Shaul oyen et David me'ayom ahu v'ha'ala. This is a critical turning point. So whereas before I showed you the pasuk where it says, and he loved him, he brought him close, he made him his personal weapons bearer, he goes out to war with him. As soon as David HaMelech becomes successful, Shaul HaMelech is gripped with this terrible jealousy and hatred. So much so that what does he try to do to him?
Tries to kill him.
So let's look. Look at Perek Yutet, Pasuk Aleph. Vaydaber Shaul el Yonatan. Shaul speaks to Yonatan b'no, his son, ve'el kol avadav, and he speaks to all his servants. So he doesn't make this matter unknown. What does he tell them? Lahamit et David. Go kill David. V'Yonatan ben Shaul chafetz b'David mod. But Yonatan was a very, very loyal friend of David. So what does he do? Vayaged Yonatan le David. He tells David, my father wants to kill you. Go, run, take care of yourself, and go hide. It's worth it if you have the time. Read about the exchange of what happens, where David HaMelech consistently, he comes to Shaul when he's called. Shaul HaMelech tries in his own palace twice. When David HaMelech is playing the kinar, he throws a spear at him. He misses. But the intent was assassination. He is trying to kill David HaMelech. David's response is not, let's go kill Shaul. His response is not, let's go harm him. He constantly keeps coming and saying, well, how do I make things better? How do I make things different? I want to look with one of the episodes. If you look at Perek Yud Tet, Pasuk Tet. Here's another pasuk which tells you, "Vatihi ruach Adonai ra'a el Shaul." Again, he has this horrible, evil spirit on him. V'hu bebeito yoshev v'chanito biyado v'David managem bayad. and he's holding a spear in his hand. David is playing. Vayivakesh Shaul lakot b'chanit, and he throws the spear. But what happens? David moves, and it ends up going straight into the wall. Vayiftar mipnei Shaul. Yeah. He threw the spear. Vayachat hachanit bakir. V'David nas vayimlat balayla hu. David realizes he's putting his actions to his words. He's attempting to kill me, and he runs away. This starts the chase for years between David and Shaul HaMelech. Ultimately, I want to lead you to a scene where David HaMelech is this close to capturing and killing Shaul HaMelech and what he does. So if you'll go with me for a minute to Perek Chav Daled, Pasuk Aleph. Okay. Vayal, so this David HaMelech he's on the run. There's some really interesting stories of who he bumps into, which personalities are kind to him, which ones pelt him with rocks, who joins his army. It's very interesting. You look, initially when he runs away from Shaul HaMelech, the only people who join him are his family members. So his brothers do switch loyalties from Shaul to David. And also it says all the people who really, they had their own gripes with the kingdom. So it wasn't necessarily that they supported David as much as they disliked Shaul. So it's like a bunch of misfits that now become David's men. Yes? They run away. And here, Vayal David Misham ve'yeshev b'mitzudat En Gedi. And he's hiding over there by the fortress of En Gedi. Vayi kasher shav Shaul me'acharei haPlishtim. Meanwhile, Shaul is busy dealing with a war with the Plishtim. Vayagidu lo, and his men tell him, Hine David b'midbar En Gedi. You want to know where David is hiding? You've been searching for him. You already killed the whole city of Kohanim because you knew that he stopped in there. You've searched for him in other places, in Tsiklag, by the Zifim. He's now in En Gedi. Vayikach Shaul 3,000 ish, and he takes 3,000 strong soldiers, and he goes on an attempt again to capture and kill David. Vayavo el Gidrot Hatzon al Haderech v'sham Ma'ara, and he comes to the valley over there by En Gedi, and he sees a cave. Vayavo Shaul l'hasech et raglav. Very interesting terminology to say he went to relieve himself, meaning he went to use the restroom because people are not animals. Right? It's why when we go out to the war, along with all the ammunition and weaponry, Jewish people have to take along a shovel. Why a shovel? Because human beings, like animals, have to relieve themselves. But unlike animals, we're still human. And we can't lose our dignity. So Shaul goes into the cave to relieve himself. V'David v'anashav biyarketei ha'ma'ara yoshvim. And David happens to be the cave that he decides to go relieve himself in, is the cave that David HaMelech is sitting in. Now, the only way you could understand what's happening here is if you've actually ever gone caving. By show of hands, have any of you ever gone caving? Okay. One day, God willing, I will share with you my story about going caving and falling 2 stories and making it out alive. But until then, for many years, I went caving in New York, in Albany, upstate New York, and then in Israel. There are 2 main places to go caving. The obvious question here is, if Shaul walked in, he should immediately see David. Yes. The reason I ask if you went caving, unless you went caving, you will never understand what absolute darkness feels like. So you step into the entrance of the cave, and I'm not talking about above ground caves. Okay? For example, I went to a cave, it's called Marat Alma. It's about 13 miles north of Tzvat. You have to rappel down into the bowels of the earth, and then there's the entrance of the cave. When you step foot into the cave, you don't have to take more than 5 steps in. You are plunged into such darkness that you can't feel if your eyes are open or closed. I remember sitting there, and we had gone, obviously, so you wear hard hats and you wear flashlights. But we sat down, and this was a Friday. I had a group of girls. We sat down on the floor of the cave, and I told them, let's put off our flashlights, and we're going to sing a little bit. And I remember the feeling, I kept on tapping my eyes because I couldn't feel if my eyes were open or closed because the darkness is so absolute. There's just no light. In fact, the tour guide told us something very unfortunate, which is a few weeks before, there had been 2 boys who had gone camping, and they were going caving, and only one of them came out alive, because the other one had lost his flashlight, lost power, And the tragedy is they found him not even 10 feet away from the entrance. It was simply so dark, he could not find his way out. And in that context, this actually makes sense. Yes? Shaul goes into a cave to relieve himself. David is in the recess of the caves, and yet Shaul doesn't spot him. He comes, he's sitting. What happens? Look at Pasuk He. Vayomeru anshe David. Vayomru anshe David elav. So David's men tell him, Hine hayom asher amar Adonai elecha, hine. This is the day Hashem's delivering Shaul HaMelech into your hands, literally. Your enemy, Hine anochi noten et oivecha biyadecha. He's in your hands. Vasita lo kasher yita beinach. Do what's good in your eyes. What does David do? Vayakam David vayichrot et knaf ha'me'il asher Shaul balat. He goes over to Shaul. They have to understand, Shaul is a king. He's wearing this long robe. David HaMelech cuts off a little, he tears it. He rips off a little part of the robe. Vayhi, and after he does this, Vayhi achreichen vayach lev David. David feels, I did something wrong. Why? I shouldn't have cut off the hem. I shouldn't have cut off that edge. I shouldn't have touched Shaul. I shouldn't have disrespected him like that. Vayomer la'anashav, and he turns to his men. He says, Chalila li. He said, God forbid. Im e'aseh et hadavar hazeh. If I would do anything, why? Ladoni leMashiach Adonai. In the end of the day, Shaul HaMelech is the anointed one. I would never lishloach yad. I'm not going to send my hand to proactively kill him. And he says, Vaishasad David et anashav, and he rebukes, he chastises his people. He tells them that's the wrong thing. Don't touch Shaul. Don't kill him. Don't preempt an attack. He ends up coming out. Shaul comes out of the cave. As soon as he leaves, David comes out. And he calls to him. Vayakam David achreichen, vayetze me'ara. He calls after Shaul. He says, look what I have. Look what I have in my hand. I have your coattails. If I wanted to, right now could have been your end. But I didn't. I don't hate you. I don't want to kill you. I am not looking to persecute you. He says some harsh words over there. May Hashem be the judge between you and myself. You look at Pasuk Yud Zayin. Vayi kechalot David l'daber. When David finishes speaking these words, Vayomer Shaul. Shaul says to him, Hakolecha ze bni David. Is that you, my son David? This relationship requires a tremendous amount of studying. He's out to murder him. David is able to kill Shaul. He refrains from doing it. He speaks to his heart. And Shaul HaMelech seemingly says, is that my child? You, David? Vayisa Shaul kolo vayefk. And Shaul starts crying. And he calls out, he says, Vayomer al David. He says to David, Sadik ata mimeni. You're much more righteous than me. Ki ata gimaltani hatova vani gimalticha hara. Because all you've done is shower me with love and goodness and kindness, and all I do is bring you bad. He said, you could have killed me. You could have killed me, and you didn't. Now, don't think this is not a happily ever after story. Okay? Their relationship does not get healed. Unfortunately, you still have one day he loves him, one day he hates him. And I say one day, it's not. We're talking about years. But when Shaul and Yonatan die in battle, and this is where I want to take you for a minute. Look at Shmuel Bet. You would think that when Yehonatan, not Yehonatan because he was David HaMelech's friend, but when Shaul HaMelech, the arch nemesis seemingly of David, the one who's constantly persecuting him, when he dies, David HaMelech's reaction should be, thank God. Thank God that problem's gone. And yet that's not his reaction at all. He rips his garments. And if you look at Perek Aleph, Pasuk Yud Zayin, it says, Vayikonen David et hakina azot al Shaul v'al Yonatan beno. He composes this most beautiful, we say by Echa, we have kinot, right? These beautiful solemn songs, eulogies. Really, it's a eulogy. And the things he says about Shaul are incredible. But there's one pasuk where he says, Ech naflu giborim. How did these beautiful giants fall? And you read it and you think to yourself, that's so interesting. Here is somebody again who has made David's life hell. If you look into Tehillim 142, Kuf Membet, Maskil David, Bioto ba'me'ara tefillah. Right? He's in the cave and he's screaming, Koli el Adonai ezak, Koli el Adonai etchanan. I'm praying, I'm screaming to you, help me out of this misery. Yeah, there's that. Here he's the anointed one. He knows he's going to be the next king. He should be living the high life of being respected, cared for. And instead, what is he doing? He's hiding in a cave. The cave is wet. There are bats. There are snakes. I promise you, there are a lot of things in caves that you don't ever want to bump into. He has the opportunity to kill Shaul HaMelech. And what does he do? He tells his people, don't touch him. In the end of the day, there's more than just our personal fight. There's a Jewish nation that cannot be fractured. Just because internally we have politics, me and Shaul, doesn't mean nationally we can hurt the people like this. And that is something incredible. Because most people, when they're involved in their own petty fights, cannot see past the, you hurt me, I hurt you, I'm the victim, now it's my chance to get back at you. Even Shaul can't get past it. Yeah, all he could think about is not, wow, look how David HaMelech helped us with the Plishtim. Look at how David HaMelech helped us against Goliath. It's, look at the women who are busy singing his praises better than mine. And David HaMelech's whole approach is, but it's not about me. Internally, the Jewish people can't be fractured. And the chaos that will be caused by me killing the anointed one, it's not something I could ever recover from. Now you find, I think I have a couple of minutes. Yeah? I'm going to go a little faster. You find a very similar story. So not with Shaul, the father-in-law and the king, but with Avshalom, the son. Tell me who Avshalom was and what happened, in a nutshell. Yeah, what's the backstory? Why did Avshalom and David get into a fight to begin with? Do you know? You would think that's where the story starts. It doesn't, though. Let's start where the story actually starts. Yefé mod. We have a very, again, I told you, there's a reason I think religious people don't like reading Tanakh. Because there are very uncomfortable stories in here. One of them being the story about Avshalom, Amnon, and Tamar. I want you to read the story about Amnon and Tamar. I'm going to tell it to you, but it's worth reading all the details. Yes? You have, if you look at Shemuel Bet, Perek Yud Gimel, Pasuk Aleph. You have a very, very tragic story unfolding here. Let's look at it. We have a few minutes. Yeah, we have a few minutes. Okay. Okay, so this is after they come back from war. Yeah, they just came back from war with Ammon. Okay, they just came back with war from Ammon. This story takes place. So this is after the war. Avshalom ben David. Avshalom, the son of David, has a sister whose name is Tamar. Vayahaveh Amnon ben David. So we know David had more than one wife, like many of our biblical characters. And Avshalom has a sister named Tamar. Don't get confused. Avshalom then later on has a daughter also named Tamar, seemingly after his sister. But Amnon, who was slated to be the next king, so he was the oldest of David's sons, is infatuated with Tamar. So much so that he literally is lovesick. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He just wants her. All he dreams about, he sleeps about, he thinks about. And one of his friends named Yonadav tells him, if you want her, take her. He says, how in the world am I going to take her? What am I going to do? And Yonadav hatches a plan with him, an absolutely horrible plan, where he tells Amnon, feign to be sick. And when you're sick, I'm sure your father's going to say, what do you need? Say, I need Tamar to bring me food. Let her bring you food. And when she brings you food, you do what you want. And that's how the story unfolds. Tamar comes and she's cooking food for him and she wants to give him the food. And he says, no, I don't want the food. Everybody leave the room. He locks the door and he ultimately rapes her. And she cries to him and begs to him, please, this is not what we do. He doesn't care. The tragedy is beyond. As soon as he rapes her, the pasuk says he hates her. So the passion, the love, the want, the will flips immediately to this disgust, this hatred, so much so that he kicks her out of the house. And again, she cries and don't do this. Don't shame me like this. You already shamed me once. Don't shame me again. And she walks out and she had taken her beautiful outfit. She ripped it. She put ashes on her head and she starts screaming. And that's when, if you look at pasuk tet, ותיקח את המסרט ותצעק לפניו. No, let's consider here. Okay. If you look at pasuk tet vav, it says, "Vaisna'eh Amnon." As soon as he rapes her, he hates her. Sinah gdola ma'od, a huge hatred. Ki gdola hasinah asher sinah me'ava. The infatuation so quickly on a dime turns into the greatest hate. V'yomer la'Amnon kumi lechi. He tells her, get up and get out of here. And she cries. She says, what did you do to me? What are my chances? Now again, you have to understand the context. She says, you just hurt me. You just raped me. What am I supposed to do now? Now you're going to throw me out like I'm a dog? She goes out. She ends up ripping her outfit and she cries. And she meets Avshalom on the road. If you look at Pasuk Ched, Vayomer ela Avshalom achia, and her brother Avshalom says, Ha'imonon achicha haya imach? You're screaming. You're mourning. You ripped your clothing. Did Amnon do something to you? She says, yeah. He tells her, shh, don't scream. I will take care of this. And again, something very tragic. HaMelech, and I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer for why. HaMelech David shama et kol hadvarim ha'ela veyichar lo mod. David HaMelech hears what Amnon did, and he's really, really angry. But the next pasuk doesn't say that he did anything. Yes? Lo diber Avshalom im Amnon l'merav ha'tov ki sana Avshalom et Amnon. Now again, this is, we talked about when the leadership is not strong, it's usually the people that rise up. And when the people rise up, they're not always the ones who bring the most justice. Simply, whenever there's a vacuum of power, somebody gets up. Ultimately, David HaMelech, it seems, does not do anything to Amnon. Why? I don't know. There are many mefarshim. I haven't found one that sat well with me yet. Avshalom takes the law into his hands and he sets up a trap where he ends up murdering Amnon. David HaMelech is angry at him. He murdered Amnon, and Avshalom is banished from the kingdom. He leaves. A couple of years later, Yoav, Ish Tzeruya, so the general of the army, sees that David is suffering. He sees that ultimately David lost his oldest son, Amnon. He now lost his son, Avshalom, and he sets a very clever plot of how to get him back. David brings him back. David doesn't see him for the first 2 years, so he lets him come back, but he doesn't speak to him. Eventually he speaks to him, and at this point, like you said, Sarla, Avshalom already has his own following. He has his own ideas. The Chachamim tell us he would stand outside of Bet Din, and he would just whisper things, because we know that the kings were in charge of the courts. He would whisper things, oh, you think David is just, oh, and he would insinuate chaos and hatred towards his own father. Why? He was very wise. He knew that in order to rebel, he can't do it on his own. He's going to need people to follow him. And he gets a significant amount of people to sign up to his cause. And his goal now is overthrow David HaMelech. And he chases him. In fact, if you look into Tehillim Gimel, right, the 3rd chapter is dedicated Bivocho mipnei Avshalom beno. He's running away from his own son. Something crazy. He's running away because his own son wants to kill him. I want to take you to the last battle, which is Avshalom is now really ensnared. Yes, he and his army, they were originally the ones who were pursuing. Now they're being pursued. So whereas they were on the offense, they're now running away for their life. And David HaMelech warns his people, don't kill Avshalom. If you find him, bring him home to me. He's still my child. I'm not looking to harm him. No, unfortunately, you have this, where the one in charge gives one order. The second in command decides that he could defy the order. Yoav gives a different order. So the general bumps into one of his soldiers and they say, we see that Avshalom, the pasuk describes him as somebody who had very beautiful hair, long, beautiful locks. And this forest seems to have been one big tangle. The soldiers that were running away kept on falling, hurting themselves. Avshalom is riding, and seemingly his hair got stuck in the tree. Yes? So here he is now stuck and tangled. And the soldier comes and tells Yoav, we could capture him. And Yoav says, why do you just kill him? And the soldier said, because David HaMelech gave the commandment not to kill his son. Yoav says, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to go. And he goes and he stabs him to death. And that's where Avshalom dies. And when they come back to tell David, David bursts out crying. I want to look at the pasuk with you. Look at Perek Shmuel Bet, Perek Yud Tet, pasuk Vav. I'm melachim already. I jumped. Tell me. Nachon. It's Yutet Vav. Yeah? No. Shmuel Bet. I see I wrote Yutet Vav, but that's not where I see it. Yeah, it's pasuk Hey. Yeah, so it's Perek Yutet pasuk Hey. VaHaMelech la'at et panav. ויזעק HaMelech kol gadol. And he cries, Bini Avshalom, Avshalom Bini, Bini, my son, my son. And it's interesting because similar to the battles with Shaul HaMelech, you find that whereas David HaMelech was very clear that he needs to squelch the rebellion, he needs to protect himself, when it came to internal dissent, his goal was to minimize the hurt, the chaos, the destruction. Unlike what you find, and this I'm going to give you your own homework to do, find the external battles that David HaMelech fights, whether it's, I made a partial list with the Plishtim, particularly Goliath, Kinan, Ammon, Aram, Amalek. That's just a tiny list. The way he fights them is like he says in Tehillim, Erdof oivai, Vasigem, v'lo ashuv ad kalotam. He goes on the greatest offense. I will send you a chart of how he expands the borders of the Jewish nation because he is unafraid to go and to fight and not come back until he's utterly destroyed them down to the root. And I believe there's something brilliant about this model. Where David HaMelech categorizes people differently. It doesn't sound politically correct. It's not politically correct. You see, I have my family that I have to protect. And then there are the outsiders. Yes? And everybody makes that decision of who's part of their family. So my family may be my community. And my community, the people who are part of my community, I will tolerate. I will bend over backwards. I will make time for even when I don't. I will make sure at 20, they're my people and I am theirs. But part of my role as a good leader is to make sure that those on the outside who want to hurt those on the inside, I don't deal with them with the same tolerance, the same love, the same flexibility, the same rationale like I do with the people inside. Because if I were to, because I'm such a nice, kind, compassionate person, ultimately I'm hurting the people that I love most. And I think sometimes we don't learn this lesson, unfortunately, until it's too late. You see houses where, we want to be loving and opening and warm and welcoming to everybody. Yeah, but if you know that person is dangerous around children and you have children, your obligation is to make sure you triple lock the doors and you never let them in. Because whereas you think you're being so nice and open, ultimately you're hurting those who you were meant to protect. Does it mean that all outsiders are enemies? Of course not. Of course not. We're simply talking about those who are outsiders and are enemies. We have to make sure we keep them out. And if it means going on the offensive and not coming back until we've utterly destroyed them, then so it must be. Because anything less than that is a traitor to our own people. And you see this with David HaMelech consistently. Every single time there's internal battle from those who are literally out to kill him. So it's not we had a bad day together. It's not, well, we disagreed on which side the tablecloth should or shouldn't go. We're talking about people like Shaul HaMelech, who actively is hunting him down. Avshalom, who is actively looking to murder him. And yet David HaMelech says, but these are internal politics. And internally, I deal with things really differently. Internally, there's sensitivity, sophistication, a tremendous amount of love. Shlomo HaMelech says, Al kol pishaim tichase ahava. Right? Love is able to cover up on a lot of chataim. A lot of things that I would never tolerate from somebody else, I will tolerate from my spouse and my child. Why? Because there's a certain amount of love. And no, it doesn't mean I'm a doormat. It simply means in the context of the relationships that are so critical, my rationalization of how I want to deal with things is very different than the outsider who wants to trample us. And I think sometimes as a nation, we're afraid to say these words because of how it makes us look, how it makes us sound. And I see this all the time. We're places who are trying to cater to everybody, ultimately cater to no one. You see, when I get hired for jobs, so they ask me, what's my specialty, right? Because mental health is a very large range. If I check off every box, you know what it should tell you? My specialty is nothing. I have no specialty. Because it cannot be that I'm also going to be the therapist who knows how to deal with anxiety and depression and bipolar and autism and LGBTQIA plus issues and couples counseling and psychopathology. It's just not possible. There's a reason in English we say the jack of all trades, the master of none. We live in a world where sometimes we so often try to make everything good for everybody all the time. And what it does is we compromise on the people who really need us. The people who really we need to protect. The people who, there's somebody else who's going to take care of them. I'm not telling us let's be callous. There's a reason the Torah tells us there's an order of operation. You have extra money. You want to give tzedakah. It's really nice that you want to take care of the whole world. Aniye ircha kodmi. But you have people in your own city who need help. So what does it help if you're sending billions of dollars in aid and packages to somewhere when in your own home, there are people who are suffering. In your own community, there are people who are dying. And this is something I believe the Jewish people have to be very comfortable saying. It's not our hatred for the other that fuels us. It's our love and unequivocal support of our own nation that drives us to do the things that we do. Do we wish that we didn't have to have war? Of course. Our prayers couldn't be more filled with Oseh Shalom, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Shalom, Shalom. Our whole prayer all the time is peace and peace and peace and more peace and more peace. And yet when it comes the time to fight, David HaMelech says, I will make the differentiation between those who I must protect, those who I have to keep close, and therefore I will tolerate. More than I will tolerate. I will bend over backwards. If David HaMelech would have killed Shaul, it would have been justified. And yet it probably would have started one of the earliest civil wars in the Jewish people. If David HaMelech wanted Avshalom dead, what would it tell us about him as a leader? It doesn't mean that he didn't deserve to die. Simply the way we deal with things internally has to be different than the way we deal with external problems. And I think it's really important as a nation and as individuals to understand who's in your closest circles, who needs the most protection. And it doesn't mean because we hate others. It simply means because those who are dependent on us, those who have given their vote of confidence in our hands, those who've said, I choose you to lead, we are responsible to make sure that they don't get let down, that we are not irresponsible leaders who, because we want to love and care and give, end up trampling and hurting those who we were meant to protect the most. And I think this is hard. It's a really hard lesson because ultimately, David doesn't earn many friends with this approach. That's the truth. Externally, every nation he fought with, they were not his friends. Internally, not everybody was his friend either. I don't think he was running a popularity contest. I think David HaMelech cared enough about the nation that whether they loved him, whether they hated him, whether they wanted him dead or alive, his ability to say, but I'm in charge. I'm the leader. I'm the parent. And if I'm the one who's responsible for you, I will make all the decisions that are in my power to protect you, to care for you, and to make sure that your freedoms aren't trampled on. And if it means waging war against everybody on the outside, I will do it. And I will make sure I am successful. I will not come back until I've destroyed the enemy. Internally, I'll make sure that I don't vilify my people. You don't find once that he calls Shaul or Avshalom his enemy, because he understands that you're not my enemy. We may be fighting with each other. We may be hating each other. In the end of the day, we're brothers and sisters. In the end of the day, you're part of my family. So I disagree with how you keep Shabbat and kosher and fill in the... Who cares? In the end of the day, you're my brother. You're my sister. And it's not nepotism. Okay? It's not my favor. It's simply, that's the way the world is built, that we take care of first ourselves and then in our closest circles. And I pray Be'ezrat Hashem that we should be able to create such a balance where those who are reliant on us know that we will have unwavering protection and support. And those on the outside understand that if you want to stretch out a hand in peace, that is our goal. That is what ultimately we want before we ever go to war. These are in the Hilchot Rambam, and I'm going to end with this. Before we ever go to war, the first thing we do is we call out to peace. We don't want to fight. We don't want bloodshed. We ask the people, do you want peace with us? Because if the answer is yes, even if you're part of HaMelech, we can make peace with you. You can become so much a part of our nation that we know it says the Bnei Haman sat in Bnei Brak and taught us Torah. We're not racist like that. But if you don't want peace, you should know you messed with the wrong nation. You should know you messed with the wrong people, because Erdov, Oivai, Vasigem, V'lo Ashuv At Kalotam. We will run, we will persecute, and we will not come home until the job is done. And I'm blessing us that the job should be done. That's my blessing. My blessing is the job should be done. The people of Israel should be safe. The Jewish people of Israel should be safe, because ultimately a war destroys. That's the bottom line. I always feel like in war there are no winners. It's simply who lost less. War is ugly. War has bloodshed. And really our prayer for the world is that we should live in a world, and I keep telling you this pasuk because it's so relevant. We should live in a world where we're able to take all our ammunition and say it's useless. Maybe we can now turn these into plowshares, and we could turn them into Boeing 747s because we have absolutely no use for them. But until we get to that place, I'm blessing us. It says, Hashem Oz, right? Adonai Oz la moiten, Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. When Hashem blesses the nation with strength, inevitably He blesses us with peace. And I'm blessing us that we should be able to be strong so we can protect ourselves and ultimately bring peace, not just to the Jewish people, but to all the people in the world. Until then, thank you so much for learning with me.